in recent years, we had this thing in America called the Me Too movement. If the equivalent to that had happened in Rome and someone had said, Julius Caesar wouldn't do anything for me unless I'd compromised sexually with him, everybody had been like, yeah, that's what you do. Like, so he's a rich, powerful man. The rich and powerful had sexual access to everyone in their household under them. Like males and females, they didn't care. Young or old, didn't matter. There could not possibly have been a Me Too movement in ancient Rome or Greece. And so Jesus is born into this brutal, brutal world.
This is the Land in the Bible podcast.
All right, welcome to the Land in the Bible podcast. This is our Easter episode. And so today we're going to be talking about the resurrection and the implications of the resurrection really on the world. So I'm here with Jameson Creel. How you doing, Jameson?
Man, I'm doing great.
Awesome. So as I said, we're going to be talking about Easter and the resurrection. So what are some things, I know you're going to talk about some historical things related to this event and maybe how it changed the world. So give me a little bit of a setup of where we're going.
Yeah, I just kind of want to look at the world Jesus was born into and what it became as a result of him. Like how did his life, death, and resurrection directly change the Greco-Roman world that he was born into? You know, because there's no doubt that Jesus changed everything. He really did. You know, even if you're a secular person, even if you don't accept that there was a real resurrection, you have to accept the fact that Jesus' believers poured out of, you know, the Holy Land, Israel, ran all over the Mediterranean world converting people. They were highly effective and they changed the world. You know, and you know, we've had a couple of episodes where we talked about apologetics. And at the end of the day, to me, the greatest apologetic for Christianity is the fact that Christianity exists. You know, how do we get here? How did a religion launch? You know, and we've talked about how the Christology, the high Christology, was intact from the beginning. Death, resurrection, and deity of Christ from the very beginning. How does that spring out of the ground? You know, how does a religion teaching that in a place where it can be easily falsified, you know, I produce a body and it's over. How does that happen? How do you have followers who believe they have seen something like that, whether it was Paul or Peter or James or, you know, an endless number of them who believe with such absolute certainty that they're willing to go to their graves, or to their deaths. They're willing to be boiled in oil, salted in two. I mean, on and on and on. Torturous deaths. And they don't flinch. They go. And, you know, you have these stories of martyrs like singing praises as they're burnt, chopped, crucified, you name it. How does that happen? And what I think you have to concede is, whether you're talking about Paul or the rest of them, is that they really believe they'd seen a risen Jesus. They just, you have to wrestle with that. The fact that these guys really believed and they were there, you know, and so then you have, you know, people that like to say, well, you know, nothing can prove a miracle because miracles don't happen. I'm like, well, are you sure? I mean, look at the world we live in. I mean, even the most skeptical, you know, I heard Richard Dawkins the other day talking, and he was, you know, talking about evolution, you know, like, I believe in evolution, but then he was basically asked about abiogenesis, which is like the emergence of life, you know? So it was like, yeah, but how did you get from inorganic chemistry to like something that was self-replicating, like a cell? And he's like, oh, I have no idea how that happened. Like, really? He's like, yeah, I have no idea. Like, he said, once you give me that, I can give you the rest. But no idea how you get there. Nobody knows. These people are like, oh, we made a cell in a lab. No, they didn't make a cell in a lab. They made something in a lab. It's not a cell. It's not even remotely close to a cell. And nobody knows how life came to be. You live in a miracle every day. We were talking before we shot earlier about, for me, I have no problem believing in miracles because everything's a miracle. Like I've been present for the birth of 5 of my children. You can't tell me that's not a miracle. It's unbelievable. In my yard, I have trees that make, fruit. So they turn sunlight into food for me. You think that's not magical? That's not amazing to you? That's not miraculous? So I just think people dismiss the fact that they're like, yeah, but that happens all the time. Well, just because it happens all the time doesn't mean it's not amazing. So whether it's the Big Bang or abiogenesis, all of your scientists, all of your naturalists, people, naturalistic worldview are kind of like, well, give us one miracle, we'll explain the rest, or give us 2 or 3, maybe, give us a nice fine-tuned universe that popped into existence and get us the first cell, and then we'll explain the rest. Like, oh, okay. So we give us a couple of miracles. Well, I believe in the one where Jesus came back to life,
Yeah. Even if you can explain everything that happened after the Big Bang, I mean, you still need to know what caused the Big Bang. You have to either decide that something caused it or matter was there and caused itself by gravity or a black hole or a series of things that happened. I mean, it's like something, at some point you have to either say it's God or you have to believe that it was.
Did matter just exist of itself?
A natural miracle? I don't know. Maybe you would say that, it's a natural.
Yeah. And then you kind of go downstream from that. And you've got things like human consciousness, the fact that not only are we alive, but we know it. And we have hopes and dreams and aspirations and thoughts. And why should natural processes lead to that? What even is that? No one can define it. There's so many things that are so far beyond explanation that science can't approach and can't get close to. That, and that's before you get into sort of philosophical things like, love. Can science tell me what my wife is worth, what my children are worth? Like, no, it can't. It has no tools to approach that. So I just think there's a lot more going on than we're willing to admit. And to me, the resurrection being real explains the fact that we're sitting here right now in the cultures that we have, with the history we have, with the books that we have, better than any other explanation. All the other explanations are absurd, frankly, to me. And that's,
I think, well, and I'll just comment on that. I think this is interesting because, we did this whole series on evidence for the resurrection. And, for people that want to push back on that, I think the important distinction is when we're talking about evidence for the resurrection, we're talking about historical evidence, cultural evidence, maybe just where things are pointing. But I think as a Christian, it comes down to the fact that we believe God can do miracles. If God created everything, he can do a miracle like that.
Yeah, that's right. And you always look at the world through like a paradigm, a worldview, And if your worldview dismisses miracles, it just can't be. I can't ever possibly accept this. Well, okay, I guess you're never going to get where, So a lot of it has to do with sort of, again, your worldview, your paradigm, what you will accept as real, and to people that just dismiss miracles. And, I would just challenge them and just ask them, like, do you really think you know everything? Do you really think you know all the boundaries of all these things? And, have you never experienced something that felt mystical, that felt, transcendent, more than just your normal life as explained by physics and chemistry? You know, I just, to me, I cannot accept the fact that humans are just dirt, that there's nothing transcendent about a human being. I can't accept it. I can't accept that there's no good or evil, like capital G, capital E, good and evil, that there are not things that are evil at any time, any place, any culture. You know, like some people want to say that morality is always like cultural and relative to this place and time. And I do think that there are different cultural moments where we emphasize different virtues. You know, I think right now we're in a cultural moment where we emphasize kindness, you know, being nice. There were other moments in history where we emphasize things like honor or honesty, you know, which we don't, I think, care as much about right now. You know, there have been places and times in the world where historically where men who were sentenced to die, to be executed, could ask, can I go home and set my business in order? And if they would give their word, they could leave jail for a year to set their, you know, their affairs in order and then come back and get their head chopped off. And they would come back because if you get, you know, because they valued honesty and integrity and honor that much. But we don't do that anymore, you know, but, you know, we care a lot about being nice. And so I do think you get variations in the virtue that's being, you know, elevated at any given moment in history. But I don't think that the core of what virtue is changes. I think it's the same. I think it's transcendent. Like, I just don't think, you know, killing and raping a 12-year-old girl for fun, I don't think that that's good in any culture at any time in history. That's not okay anywhere. You know, I believe in transcendent good and evil. And if you believe in these things, then you have to think, well, who did it then? Who gave it to you? Who made humans special? Who made human dignity a thing that matters? I mean, to me, it's insanity that people don't believe in God, but do believe in human rights and dignity. I can't wrap my head around that at all. You know, if we're no different than any other animal, why shouldn't Darwinism apply to us as well? Why shouldn't the strongest amongst us eat all the food, consume all the goods, breed, multiply, and kill the weaker ones?
Well, and I think this really sets the stage for what we're going to talk about, because that's a great question to ask.
Does, actually.
And why aren't we behaving that way? So maybe give me a little bit of insight on
because
why
of Jesus.
We're not,
and it's Easter, so we're happy about it. No. What I wanted to do, just as sort of a short little thought, you know, today, was just ask the question: was Jesus effective? Did he change our world? And so I wanted to look at, you know, 2 or 3 aspects of Roman life, the way it was when he was born, and then what happened because of him. So the world that Jesus was born into, the world of, you know, the Greeks and the Romans, was unquestionably, undeniably brutal. The Romans valued nothing more than strength. They loved strength and power. The greatest embodiment of the Roman ideal was Julius Caesar. You know, and we've covered this in other episodes, so I don't necessarily need to recount the whole thing, but, you know, they loved Julius Caesar because he went out and with 50,000 Roman soldiers killed 1 million Gauls. And they're like, yeah, you proved that we're the strongest. And he brought back slaves and he brought back goods, you know, and they were like, this is awesome. We all get slaves and we get money because of the conquests, you know, and they didn't care about the people they conquered. They didn't care. What they cared about, if you look at the way Romans wrote history, was whether it was Jews or Gauls or Britons, the people they were conquering, they wanted to portray them as like super, super strong and heroic. Like they were awesome and so strong and so genuine, but we beat them, you know, because we're the super strongest and the most heroic. So you have these like paintings of a dying Gaul and things like that. And it's like they look really heroic and kind of sad. And so Romans could be like, oh, wow. But aren't we awesome because we killed him? No thought to human rights, human dignity, things like that. They didn't think that way at all, And, we care about the dignity of women now and the dignity of the poor and the powerless. Nobody in Rome cared about that. In recent years, we had this thing in America called the Me Too movement, where, lots of women basically talked about the idea that in their work, they had been pressured to compromise sexually in order to get advancement. If the equivalent to that had happened in Rome and someone had said, oh, Julius Caesar wouldn't do anything for me unless, I'd compromised sexually with him, everybody had been like, yeah, that's what you do. Like, so he's a rich, powerful man. Of course, the rich and powerful had sexual access to everyone in their household under them. Like males and females, they didn't care. Young or old, didn't matter. There could not possibly have been a Me Too movement in ancient Rome or Greece. They just didn't care. They're powerful, had the rights. And so Jesus is born into this brutal, brutal world. And there was no symbol. There was nothing embodied the brutality of that Roman world more than the two or three things I want to talk about today. I want to talk about gladiatorial games, crucifixion, and infanticide. Let's start with infanticide. So in the Roman world, it was totally normal to kill babies. Nobody cared. And you know it was common even if you just know literature. You have these stories like Oedipus Rex, where they just abandoned the baby. This was normally done, by the way, because they don't actually kill the baby, because like that'd be I don't want to like stab them or smother them or something. They would just take a baby, a newborn, so it can't live more than a few hours by itself, and just leave it by the side of a road, just let it die, or leave it on a field to be eaten by dogs or die of exposure. And they'd say, well, maybe somebody came. We left them to the God's hands, like whatever. Infanticide was vastly more commonly practiced against females than males. So in the Greek and Roman world, the parents of a female paid a dowry to the man who married her. Basically the thought around a girl for them was you have to provide for a girl, you got to pay for them. You got to pay for their existence. And, she is the daughter of a rich family, so need her cared for real good, So since you're going to take her off my hands, thank God you're going to take her, because I'm sick of her. I got to give you a lot of money. And so that's kind of the thought, was that a girl's a liability. And since I've got to pay for her as her dad, if you'll take her off my hands, I should give you a bunch of money. And since girls came with a bunch of money, they were considered a liability, because when they get married, you got to pay a bunch of money. And so people killed girl babies all the time because they want to pay a dowry one day. Super common. And a part of how Christianity grew is that Christians would see, babies on a roadside or in a field, and they would take them in. And so a lot of how Christianity grew was taking care of the unwanted, including infants. But infanticide was completely, utterly normal in the Roman world. Okay, nobody batted an eye at killing a girl baby, any baby, but particularly girls. Okay, so there's number one. Gladiatorial games was another one. What greater symbol? I mean, really the two great symbols of Roman oppression are probably gladiatorial games and crucifixions. So in the gladiatorial games, it's like, we can take you like a warrior, a fighter, strong man, and we can break you to the point that for our entertainment, you're going to march out there in that stadium and fight somebody to the death. just for our amusement, you know. And if you're fighting in Rome in the big Colosseum, you know, you're going to go out there and, you know, point to the emperor, you know, we who are about to die salute you, roar, you know, and then go fight and kill people, you know, or get killed yourself. Total brutality. And they loved it, you know. The Roman, I mean, you know, they would throw games in honor of gods and celebration of victories, you know, all this kind of a new emperor. And just over the course of days, sometimes just thousands of, you know, gladiators would be just run through the meat grinder of the Colosseum. And of course, you know, smaller venues, you know, outside of Rome itself. And of course, like, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be like a caged slave who has to go fight for their life periodically. It was, you know, it was disgusting in every way. And just so you'll know, it was even more disgusting than that, because they would, you know, basically rape and pedophilia were also sort of a part of the entertainment periodically. So they would have, well, sure, I'll share this. Why not? It's a little more off color than our normal content. But if you go to the Colosseum in Rome, if you go there and you walk around, what you'll see is that there are numbers over all the gates. Okay, I forget what the numbers go. It's like 1 through 20 something, whatever. But every arch has a number over it. What Rome was completely, totally classed. It was a class society. If you're a shopkeeper, a soldier, a senator, you're at this level, and you would not imagine sitting with someone beneath your status. You sit with your status. And so if you wanted to go to the games, you went across the street. There was a big market, later called Trajan's Market. I'm sure it was something else before that. But you would go and get a ticket. Now, the tickets, because they couldn't reprint paper like we can, the tickets were terracotta discs, like a coin, basically. And it had 2 numbers on it. It had a section number and a seat number, very much like how we do stadiums to this day. And so the section number corresponded to the gate. So if you were sitting in section 7, you went in gate 7. And if you go to the Colosseum, you can still see this, by the way. You can tell that each gate does something totally different. Like each arch, maybe it goes up or it goes down or it goes in dog legs or something like. But each arch opened to a different section inside. Section 1 being the emperor's booth, where he and his, you know, wife and the Vestal Virgins and the, you know, different people that he, you know, the senators that he wanted to sit with him that day. You know, section 2 is probably senators, and it kind of goes down from there, right? But you sat with your class, with your people. There were no females allowed inside, with the exception of if Caesar brought someone with him, you know, he was allowed to bring, you know, his wife. Also, priestesses of Vesta, you know, also known as Vestal Virgins, could be in his section. Other than that, the only women in the whole place were prostitutes, and the whole top ring were prostitutes. Okay. And so what would happen normally, just to sort of get, usually you've got this disgusting brew of violence and debauchery, you know. So what would basically happen is, you know, they would have intermissions, the same as, I guess, any ball game or sport, you know, and there would be entertainments, and during the intermissions where they would, again, it could be plays and things like that, often very, very like sort of bawdy, sexual, inappropriate. But during the intermissions, if you decided, you know, you'd like to have a prostitute, you could look up to that ring above you and kind of wave at one like, hey, you know, and the women could tell from where you were seating what gate you would come out of. You know, so if you're in section 3, you're coming out of gate 3. If you're in section 12, you're coming out of gate 12. They would meet you at the gate, and the business was transacted right there in the gate. Okay. Wow. So you didn't go to Rome. You just did your thing right there. Well, what's an arched doorway called in Latin? It's called a fornis. It's where we get our word fornication. Okay.
Ooh, wow.
So that's how common it was. Okay. That's how both violent and perverted the culture was. But that's how, again, sort of toxic, how both violent and debauched the culture was. That was just what happened. Nobody cared. So there's the Gladiatorial Games. Then you've got, again, probably the ultimate symbol of Roman oppression, which was crucifixion, which was that, if you were a slave, if you were a conquered person, not a Roman citizen. Roman citizens were immune from crucifixion. That's why Paul was beheaded, because he was a Roman citizen. He got the merciful, execution. He didn't get, crucified, boiled in oil, all the, crazy stuff they would do with people that they wanted to torment. Crucifixion, and we've done whole episodes on this, so I don't need to go too long into this. But crucifixion was designed from the ground up to humiliate and torture and torment. The whole point is that you were naked, beaten. Again, we've covered this in the crucifixion episode, I think, but maybe your feet were a foot off the ground. You weren't way up in the air like is depicted sometimes. You were just barely off the ground. Right there by a roadside for passersby to make fun of you, laugh at you, and in the Bible story, Jesus is only on the cross for a few hours, but that wasn't normative. Sometimes they weren't nailed. Sometimes they were tied. And even if they were nailed, you didn't really lose that much blood from, where they put those. The real problem with the fact that you were hanging by nails was that your own body weight was torturous to you. Either your body weight is on your feet with a nail resting on your bones, is how you're holding your body weight up if you push with your legs, or if you hang, then your body weight's hanging on a nail in your wrist. It's not good either way. It's ultra painful. So you're just alternating between which more torment you want, basically. And you've got to lift yourself up to breathe, which is why they broke the legs, the two thieves. Just torturous. And men lived sometimes as long as 3 days or more on the crosses. It just went on and on and on and on. And because you weren't that high off the ground and you couldn't move to defend yourself. I mean, things happen like, dogs eating your legs and flesh while you were alive, ripping your calf muscle out or something, or birds pecking at your eyes, and, just hideous, and that was all a part of the show in a public place where everyone passing by saw it. And it was meant to say, if you mess with us, we will crush you. We will beat you down. And it was done all over the empire. Now, why do I bring these three things up? Because something happened with the eruption of Christianity. With the eruption of Christianity, you had people spreading out all over the empire who said, we think that humans are made in the image of God. That's what the Bible tells us. And that when you violate a human, when you violate their rights, when you violate their personhood, when you abuse them, you're abusing and violating the image of God. And God says that's his daughter, that's his son. And he's not happy with you. So that old will to power, it was what Greeks and Romans did. That's why they loved guys like Alexander and Leonidas and Julius Caesar, who just raw, and went out and fought and conquered in the name of their people. They admired that. And all of a sudden the Christians are like, I don't think that's the way to go. And things began to change. People said, maybe you shouldn't kill your babies. Maybe you should take care of babies and value them. People came along and said, hey, maybe making guys fight to the death for fun is bad. and people came along and said, hey, yeah, well, we understand there has to be a justice system, and that, sometimes, because the ancient world, nobody really thought about not having a death penalty. That thought doesn't really come along until 100, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, something like that. But they're like, but this long, slow, torturous death for effect, it's not okay. And all of that was based on Christianity. That was based on Paul saying, before God, there is no male or female, Jew or Greek, slave or free. In other words, God loves a poor slave girl as much as he loves the emperor. So you shouldn't just, rape the staff whenever you want to. Maybe it's bad to, have so much sexual exploitation and so much violence, and something really crazy happened, which is that by, somewhere around, basically what happened was all these practices began to just die out as Christianity became more and more and more prevalent. And Christians, they didn't take over the government. They never really took over the government necessarily, but you have Constantine as a, quote unquote Christian emperor by around like 325, maybe something like that. But what happened was all these practices, as Christians spoke more and Romans heard Christians articulate those ideas, they were like, yeah, you're right. You're right. We probably shouldn't do that. And they just began to ban these things. And by the middle of the 4th century, so by 325 to 370 AD, all three of these things were banned. So the Gladiatorial Games and Crucifixion is both banned by Constantine around 325. Infanticide's banned in about 374, 375. Okay, so you have all these things. It took a couple of 200 or 300 years for it to work its way through the system. But over time, the Christian ideas won. And so what I would just point out there is that from its very beginning, the resurrection and the power of this idea that the poor and the downtrodden, that the weak, the victim, you could even say, was good and righteous, and that they weren't actually being judged. The person being judged was Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas and the high priest, and they'll have to answer to God for what they did. Those ideas percolating through society just changed everything. And I'm going to say that the only reason those ideas ever got anywhere is because Jesus was resurrected, and because those ideas had power, and because his followers were brave and bold and went all over the empire. And there's no doubt in my mind that Jesus is clearly the most influential and effective person that ever lived. That he just simply changed everything. He changed everything in the Greek and Roman world, and continues to change everything in ours. And I will, I would argue that with anybody, that people in the West who are not only are they not Christian, they're anti-Christian. I just think that they don't understand the fact that all their critiques of Christianity are Christian. That all the things that they hold dear rest. It's like they're sitting on a tree trunk or on a tree branch, cutting off the branch they're sitting on. Because all of the human rights and love, it all comes from Christ. It all does. And that his example, it just changed the world. And so, on an Easter Sunday, the thought I would just love to leave with people is to just understand that this event 2,000 years ago, not only was it effective at changing my life and yours, I hope, but it really, really did change absolutely everything. The whole world was tilted on its axis and changed, from a brutal will to power world to one where people were like, maybe we should think about the humans, because of Christ.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, the which we've talked about, Tom Holland's book Dominion, and the early chapters of Dominion really kind of like unpack that thing that you're talking about what
Oh yeah,
Rome was like, and then what happened. What the kind of the explosion.
yeah.
that
For
went
anybody
off.
who wanted to read on that, definitely Tom Holland's Dominion. We'll probably do a full episode reaction to that book at some point because it's definitely worldview shaping around here. There's another great book that's a little more approachable called The Desire of the Everlasting Hills, The World Before and After Jesus by Thomas Cahill. Just spectacular. It's about that exact thing. It's about the changes in the Roman world unleashed by Jesus and the early Christians. And it breaks down all that stuff. So yeah, there's plenty of historical evidence and great, historians who've unpacked, pretty much what we were, sort of outlining today.
Well, cool. Well, that's great. I mean, and I think as we've talked about before, it's like the church is the best evidence, and the existence of the church is good evidence for the resurrection, but also the result of the church and its effect on culture, as you were just explaining. So I think this is great. Hopefully, I think this is helpful to people and maybe just kind of gives a little bit of a different, I don't know, some different things to think about as we're talking about Easter and the resurrection, and maybe not just the event itself, but the impact that it's had. So I think this was great. But yeah, if that's it, then, we hope everyone has a fantastic Easter, and we hope you've enjoyed this episode. And as always, listen to the podcast everywhere you can. Head over to YouTube, like and subscribe. And then if you just can't get enough, go to thelandandthebible.com to subscribe for premium content. We'll see you later.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, click like and subscribe. It really helps us. And if you really enjoyed it, go on over to our website, thelandandthebible.com, and become a supporter. It helps us generate more content and gives you access to our full library of video and Bible study content.